It is estimated that over 70 million people were mummified in ancient Egypt. 3,000 years of preservation, a population larger than modern Britain. So ask yourself a simple question. Where are they? Museums hold only a fraction of a percent. The tombs in the Valley of the Kings lie mostly empty. They did not just vanish into the sands. The truth is much darker and far more commercial. We didn't just study the dead. We ate them. We painted our masterpieces with their ground-up remains, and we burned them as fuel when wood was scarce. The history of the mummy trade is not about archaeology. It is a story of global supply and demand. To understand the disappearance, we must go back to the beginning. Before the Victorian explorers, before the museums, the first people to disturb the dead were the neighbors. In the New Kingdom, tomb robbery was practically a family trade. A pharaoh was buried with the wealth of a small nation. Gold, lapis lazuli, fine linens. For a local villager, one tomb could feed a family for generations. But in these early days, the body itself was just an obstacle. The mummy was stripped of its amulets and cast aside, smashed to pieces to retrieve the gold hidden within the wrappings. However, centuries later, the body became more valuable than the gold. Enter the era of mumia. This was a case of linguistic confusion that turned into cannibalism. The Persian word mumia referred to natural bitumen, a black tar-like substance used in medicine to heal wounds. When travelers saw blackened Egyptian bodies, they made a mistake. They assumed the bodies were created using this bitumen. European apothecaries decided that if bitumen heals, then a ground-up ancient Egyptian must be the ultimate cure. By the 16th century, the trade was industrial. Merchants in Cairo were shipping tons of human dust to London and Paris. But there was a logistical problem with eating the ancients. Demand began to outstrip supply. Locating genuine tombs was dangerous and inconsistent work, and the apothecaries of Europe were hungry for product. So the merchants of Alexandria came up with a gruesome solution. If you cannot find an ancient mummy, you simply make one. In 1564, a French physician named Guy de la Fontaine visited a warehouse in Alexandria. He was expecting to see ancient relics. Instead, the owner showed him a pile of bodies that were decidedly fresh. They were the bodies of executed criminals and slaves. The merchants would fill them with bitumen and dry them in the sun. Within a few months, they looked ancient enough to fool a European doctor. The merchant laughed as he told Fontaine the truth. Europeans were not eating the magic of the pharaohs. They were eating the common dead of 16th century Egypt and paying a fortune for the privilege. As the Age of Enlightenment arrived, the medical use of mummies faded. Science began to replace superstition, but the mummy trade did not stop. It just changed industries. It moved from the apothecary jar to the artist's palette. If you walk into the Louvre today, you are looking at mummies, not in the display cases, but on the canvas. A pigment known as mummy brown became the obsession of European painters. It was a rich, transparent brown, perfect for shadows and flesh tones, and it was made exactly how it sounds. Ground-up ancient Egyptian remains mixed with white pitch and myrrh. The pre-Raphaelites loved it. Martin Drolling's famous painting Interior of a Kitchen uses it extensively. The warm shadows in that room are literally made of people. This practice continued shockingly late into history. It wasn't until the 1960s that the supply finally ran dry. A colorman in London famously told Time magazine, "We might have a few odd limbs lying around, but not enough to make paint." The art world had consumed what the doctors left behind. While artists painted with the dead, the aristocracy played with them. In the 19th century, a new fever swept through London and Paris, Egyptomania, and the hottest ticket in town was the unwrapping party. Wealthy hosts would purchase a mummy at auction. They would send out embossed invitations to society's elite. Guests would arrive in their finest evening wear, sipping champagne while a preserved human body was placed on the center table. It was a striptease of the dead. As the linens were cut away, the room would fill with ancient dust. Men cheered and women sometimes fainted from the smell. They weren't looking for history. They were looking for amulets and jewelry tucked into the bandages. The body itself was often just left behind as trash, a souvenir of a fun Tuesday night. But if the aristocracy was disrespectful, industry was ruthless. As mummies became cheaper and more plentiful, they lost their mystique. They became a raw material. In America, a persistent story claims that mummies were used as fuel. Mark Twain famously wrote about locomotives burning mummies instead of coal. He joked that a plebeian mummy didn't burn as well as a king. While Twain was likely being satirical, the reality was hardly better. There are records of mummy wrappings being sold to paper mills. The linen was high quality, perfect for manufacturing butcher paper. Imagine buying your meat wrapped in the shroud of an ancient priest. This practice only stopped because of a cholera outbreak among the mill workers. The dead, it seemed, had finally fought back. By the turn of the 20th century, the supply finally crashed. Not because we developed a conscience, but because we had simply used them all up. Centuries of eating, painting, and burning had taken their toll. What remains today in museums is the survivor's guilt of history. Every mummy in a glass case represents thousands that were destroyed. We are looking at the 0.01% who survived the looters, the ones who dodged the apothecaries, the ones who were not ground into paint or burned for steam. Every mummy you see today is a statistical miracle. But this scarcity has birthed a new debate. Now that the eating and painting has stopped, a new question arises. Do we have the right to display them at all? In the Victorian era, the unwrapping was a party trick. Today, it is a medical procedure done with CT scanners. We no longer destroy the body to see inside, but the voyeurism remains. We cannot undo the mumia trade. We cannot unpaint the canvases of the 19th century. Those bodies are gone forever, absorbed into our history and art. But for the few that remain, the role has changed. They are no longer commodities. They are ambassadors from a world we can only imagine. They remind us of a civilization that obsessed over eternity. And in a cruel, ironic twist, they achieved it. Just not in the way they expected. They wanted to live forever in the field of reeds. Instead, they live forever in our climate-controlled glass boxes. Perhaps after everything we did to them. That is the best we can offer. The next time you see a mummy, don't just look at the wrappings. Think of the empty spaces in the row beside them. And remember the millions who didn't make it.